In February 1964, a Dodge rolled onto Daytona's high banks with an engine NASCAR had never seen before. It swept the top 5 positions, humiliated Ford, made Chevrolet irrelevant, and within 8 months, NASCAR banned it from competition. This is the story of the 426 Hemi, the engine so dominant it forced America's racing establishment to rewrite the rules. Picture the pre-race morning at Daytona International Speedway, February 1964. The air smells of racing fuel and burnt rubber. Mechanics hover over a Plymouth Belvedere, its hood yawning open to reveal something that doesn't belong in a production car. The engine sits low and wide. Hemispherical combustion chambers, dual 4-barrel carburetors, valve covers stamped with a single word, Hemi. Fire it up, and the sound isn't just loud, it's violent. A mechanical snarl that rattles tool chests and silences conversation. This isn't refinement. This is war. Richard Petty climbs into the driver's seat. His Plymouth carries number 43 in Petty blue. And beneath that sheet, metal sits 425 horsepower of pure Chrysler engineering defiance. Ford had dominated NASCAR for 2 years with their 427 wedge. Chevrolet fielded the mystery motor, their secret weapon that never quite delivered. But this engine, this Hemi, was different. When practice laps began, the Plymouths and Dodges didn't just run fast. Well, they obliterated the competition. Lap times fell, rivals scrambled. Ford's racing coordinator watched from the pits, his face unreadable, but everyone knew what he was thinking. The 426 Hemi wasn't supposed to exist. Chrysler had exited factory racing in 1957 under the Automobile Manufacturers Association ban. They'd spent 6 years on the sidelines while Ford and GM poured millions into speed. But in 1962, Chrysler's new leadership made a decision. If the ban was dead, they were coming back. And they were coming back to win. Engineers at Highland Park had one directive: build the most powerful racing engine America had ever seen. No compromises, no half measures. They had 18 months. What emerged from Chrysler's competition program was an engine that married aerospace-grade metallurgy with old-school hot rod fury. It produced power in a range where most motors exploded. It breathed like nothing else on 4 wheels. And it was about to rewrite motorsports history. The 1964 Daytona 500 wasn't just a race. It was a statement. When the checkered flag fell, Plymouth and Dodge had claimed 5 of the top 6 positions. Richard Petty won. Jim Pardue finished second. Paul Goldsmith third. Ford's finest couldn't touch them. In victory lane, champagne flowed and cameras flashed. But in the NASCAR trailer, phones were ringing, furious calls from Detroit, from sponsors, from team owners who'd just been humiliated on national television. The Hemi had won, but the war was just beginning. This is the story of innovation, ambition, and the engine that forced America to choose between fair competition and corporate control. Rewind to 1960. The American automotive landscape was a battlefield disguised as a marketplace. Ford had Henry Ford II determined to beat Ferrari at Le Mans and Chevrolet on Main Street. General Motors fielded engineering talent that designed rockets by day and carburetors by night. Chrysler, the scrappy third wheel of the Big Three, survived on innovation and stubbornness. But racing was the great equalizer. Win on Sunday, sell on Monday wasn't just a slogan. It was survival strategy. Performance sold cars, championships sold respect. And in the early 1960s, NASCAR was king. The problem? From 1957 to 1962, factory racing was officially banned. The Automobile Manufacturers Association had issued an edict. No more corporate involvement in motorsports. Too dangerous, too expensive, too much bad publicity when drivers died at 180 miles per hour. The ban was a lie. Everyone knew it. Ford secretly funded Holman Moody. Chevrolet slipped parts to Smokey Yunick, but nobody would admit it. The charade held until 1962 when Ford's new vice president, Lee Iacocca, decided transparent competition beat secret shipments. Ford returned to racing officially. GM followed, and Chrysler, humiliated and hungry, mobilized. Inside Chrysler's engineering division, the pressure was immense. They'd been building good street engines. The 413 Max Wedge was a stoplight destroyer, but racing required something else entirely, something radical, something competitors couldn't copy in time. The team was led by Tom Hoover, a soft-spoken engineer with a reputation for solving impossible problems. His boss, Bob Roger, gave him a simple mandate: make us win. Hoover assembled a core group, engineers who'd worked on Chrysler's aerospace contracts, who understood thermodynamics and airflow like surgeons understood anatomy. They started with a question: what makes an engine powerful? The answer: airflow. Get more air and fuel into the cylinders, burn it more efficiently, expel it faster. Everything else was detail, but how? Pushrod V8s had inherent limitations: valve angles, port shapes, chamber design. Every manufacturer faced the same physics. The solution required rethinking everything. Hoover's team revisited an old idea: hemispherical combustion chambers. Chrysler had used them in the 1950s with the original firepower Hemi, but those engines were heavy, expensive, and complex. Racing in the 60s demanded something lighter, stronger, and more brutal. They started from scratch: new block, new heads, new everything. The goal: 425 horsepower, naturally aspirated, reliable for 500 miles at race pace. Most racing engines of the era made 400 and grenaded after 200 miles. But there was a catch. NASCAR's rulebook required production engines. At least 500 examples had to be built for street sale to qualify for racing. If Chrysler wanted to race the Hemi, they'd need to sell it. That meant convincing accountants that spending millions on a race engine would somehow pay dividends in showrooms. In 1963, Ford and Mercury won 23 of 55 NASCAR races. Chevrolet took most of the rest. Plymouth won twice. Dodge didn't win at all. Chrysler dealers were furious. Customers were defecting. Something had to change. The Hemi program got the green light in late 1963. Engineers had 4 months to prepare for Daytona, 4 months to test, tune, and ship engines to racing teams, 4 months to turn theory into dominance. The pressure was crushing, but so was the opportunity. This was Chrysler's chance to embarrass the giants, to prove that engineering brilliance could beat corporate budgets, to build something so good it couldn't be ignored. They built it, and when those Hemis arrived at Daytona in February 1964, the automotive world was about to learn a very expensive lesson. Pull back the valve covers on a 426 Hemi, and the first thing you notice is the geometry. Most V8s use wedge-shaped combustion chambers. Simple, cheap, easy to manufacture. Valves sit at an angle, ports twist to reach them, and airflow suffers for it. Efficiency is compromised for cost. The Hemi used hemispheres, half-sphere combustion chambers with valves mounted on opposite sides, splayed at wide angles. Intake valves on one side, exhaust on the other, each one nearly perpendicular to the cylinder bore. The result? Straight-shot airflow. Fuel and air rushed in without turbulence. Exhaust gases evacuated cleanly. Think of it like breathing. A wedge engine breathes through a bent straw. The Hemi breathes like lungs, deep, unrestricted, powerful, but hemispherical heads created problems. You couldn't use a single camshaft to operate valves on opposite sides of the chamber. The solution: dual rocker shafts. Complex, heavy, expensive, but necessary. Each valve required its own rocker arm, its own precisely calculated geometry. Tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. The block was cast iron, reinforced at stress points where connecting rods hammered against crankshaft journals at 7,000 RPM. Cross-bolted main bearing caps, 4 bolts instead of 2, to keep the crankshaft from tearing loose under load. Forged internals, steel crankshaft. Aluminum pistons that could survive compression ratios north of 12.5 to 1. Feeding this monster required airflow most engines could only dream of. Dual 4-barrel Carter carburetors sat atop an aluminum cross-ram intake manifold. Each carburetor fed 4 cylinders. At wide-open throttle, the Hemi inhaled 850 cubic feet of air per minute. For context, that's more airflow than most modern turbocharged engines. Displacement was 426 cubic inches, 7.0 liters in today's terms. Bore and stroke, 4.25 inches by 3.75 inches, a combination that favored high RPM breathing over low-end torque. The engine wasn't designed to idle smoothly in traffic. It was designed to pull 6,500 RPM for 500 miles while pinned at full throttle. When Chrysler dyno tested the race Hemi in late 1963, the numbers stunned even the engineers. 425 horsepower at 6,000 RPM, 480 pound-feet of torque at 5,000 RPM. Competitors' engines made similar peak power but fell flat at high revs. The Hemi pulled hard all the way to redline. That's where races were won, in the final 1,500 RPM, where other engines gasped and the Hemi screamed. Cooling was critical. Racing engines generate absurd heat. Exhaust gas temperatures exceed 1,400 degrees Fahrenheit. The Hemi used oversized water passages, high-flow water pumps, and racing radiators the size of billboards. Oil coolers kept lubrication temperatures below the point where bearings welded themselves to journals. According to period tests, the Hemi could sustain full power for hours without failure. Hot Rod magazine dynoed one in March 1964 and reported, "This engine pulls like a freight train and sounds like the apocalypse." Car and Driver called it the most powerful production-based V8 in America. But the real genius wasn't just the power, it was the durability. Ford's 427s made big horsepower, but exploded if you looked at them wrong. Chevrolet's mystery motor was fast for 20 laps, then cooked its pistons. The Hemi finished races consistently, reliably, brutally. That reliability came from obsessive engineering. Every casting was X-rayed for flaws. Every connecting rod was weight-matched within grams. Every valve spring was tested for harmonics. Chrysler's aerospace contracts had taught them that failure wasn't acceptable when lives were at stake. They applied that same discipline to racing. The result was an engine that didn't just win races, but demoralized competitors. Drivers knew that if a Hemi was behind them, it wasn't going to break, it was going to catch them. And when it did, there was nothing they could do. But every revolution has its breaking point. And this one was about to face its own. March 1964, 1 month after Daytona. Ford's racing team sat in a conference room, staring at lap time sheets that told a brutal story. The Hemi had won 14 of the first 15 NASCAR races: Plymouth, Dodge, repeat. Richard Petty looked unbeatable. Ford had spent millions on racing development, and now a Chrysler engine was making them look like amateurs. Phone calls were made, not to engineers, to executives, to Bill France, NASCAR's founder and iron-fisted ruler. The complaint was simple: the Hemi wasn't a production engine. Yes, Chrysler had built the required 500 units, but they weren't selling them to the public. They were race engines, pure and simple, bolted into street cars as a technicality. Ford argued this violated the spirit of NASCAR's production rules. France was in an impossible position. On one hand, Chrysler had followed the letter of the law. On the other, Ford threatened to pull out of NASCAR entirely if something didn't change. And Ford brought sponsorship money, fans, and legitimacy. Losing Ford meant losing NASCAR's credibility. In April 1964, France made his decision. The Hemi was banned, effective immediately. The official explanation cited availability to the public. The real explanation was simpler. Ford had political leverage and Chrysler didn't. Chrysler's response was instant and furious. They pulled their factory teams. Plymouth and Dodge dealerships plastered windows with protest signs. Enthusiast magazines ran scathing editorials. Richard Petty, NASCAR's biggest star, announced he'd race USAC and drag events instead. Behind the scenes, Chrysler's legal team explored lawsuits. Engineers argued their case with data and dyno sheets. But corporate politics aren't won with horsepower, they're won with influence, and Ford had more of it. For 6 months, the Hemi sat on the sidelines. Chrysler built street versions, detuned, emissions legal, civilized, but the race engine gathered dust. Petty drove a Plymouth with a wedge motor and finished mid-pack. Ford dominated the 1964 season. From the outside, it looked like order had been restored. But the fans weren't happy. Attendance dropped. TV ratings softened. Controversy sells, and NASCAR had just killed its most compelling storyline. France watched the numbers and realized his mistake. In December 1964, France brokered a compromise. The Hemi could return for 1965, but only if Chrysler made it a true production engine, available in dealerships, fully emissions-compliant, streetable. No more race-only specials. Chrysler agreed. They had no choice. But the damage was done. 6 months of lost development, 6 months of bad press, 6 months of watching Ford win with inferior equipment. How did it all go wrong? Simple, Chrysler had built something too good, too fast. They'd violated the unwritten rule of corporate motorsports. Win, but don't embarrass the giants. And when you do embarrass them, make sure you have the political muscle to survive the backlash. Chrysler didn't, so the Hemi paid the price. January 1965, Chrysler dealerships received an unexpected shipment. Crates marked 426 Street Hemi. Inside, a detuned, emissions-legal version of the race engine that had terrorized NASCAR a year earlier. The specifications were impressive but compromised. Hydraulic lifters instead of solid racing cams, mild 10.25-to-1 compression instead of race spec 12.5-to-1, single. 4-barrel carburetor instead of dual quads. Power output 425 horsepower, same as the race engine on paper but delivered differently. Smoother, quieter, civilized. Magazines tested it immediately. Car and driver strapped one into a Dodge Coronet and ran 0 to 60 in 5.3 seconds. The quarter mile fell in 13.8 seconds at 104 miles per hour. For 1965, those numbers were borderline science fiction. Most muscle cars struggled to break 15 seconds. Motor Trend called it the most powerful production engine in America. Hot Rod praised its durability, but every review came with caveats. It was expensive, $900 over the base V8, more than doubling the engine cost. It required premium fuel. It idled rough. It was loud, and it scared insurance companies. Dealers loved it and hated it simultaneously. Enthusiasts walked in asking for the Hemi, like it was a mythical artifact. But average buyers took one test drive and walked away. This wasn't a grocery getter. This was a race car with license plates. Sales reflected the reality. In 1965, Chrysler sold 11,000 Hemi-powered cars. Sounds impressive until you remember Plymouth and Dodge sold 350,000 total vehicles that year. The Hemi captured 3% of production. It was a halo car, a marketing tool, a bragging rights option. Not a volume seller. But on the track, the Hemi was reborn. February 1965, Daytona 500. Fred Lorenzen in a Ford led with 10 laps remaining. Then his engine let go. Darrell Dieringer took the lead in another Ford. 3 laps later, his transmission failed. Junior Johnson's Chevrolet looked strong until a tire exploded. Across the line came Jimmy Helms in a Plymouth Hemi roaring. Not the fastest car that day, just the one that finished. Chrysler won 18 races in 1965. Not the total domination of 1964, but enough to prove a point. The Hemi could compete under restrictive rules and still win. Ford responded by homologating the 427 SOHC Cammer, an exotic overhead cam monster designed explicitly to beat the Hemi. NASCAR immediately banned it, claiming it wasn't truly production-based. The hypocrisy wasn't lost on anyone. France had created a rulebook where political convenience mattered more than engineering merit. Press coverage turned cynical. Journalists openly questioned whether NASCAR rewarded innovation or punished it. Fans debated endlessly. Was the Hemi ban justified or corporate favoritism? Chrysler kept building them anyway. The Street Hemi became a cult icon. Drag racers bought them, yanked the emissions equipment, and ran 10-second quarter miles. Street racers terrorized stoplight Grand Prix from coast to coast. Insurance companies created special HEMI surcharge policies. The immediate aftermath wasn't triumph. It was compromise. The race Hemi had been neutered into streetability. But something unexpected happened. The legend grew stronger, because now, every kid who couldn't afford one wanted one. Every Ford guy secretly respected it. Every magazine comparison test used it as the benchmark. The Hemi wasn't just fast anymore, it was mythical. But history has a habit of rediscovering what it once discarded. Fast forward to 1971, federal emissions regulations strangled compression ratios. Insurance companies crushed horsepower with premiums. The muscle car era collapsed under the weight of bureaucracy and oil embargoes. The Hemi died quietly. Production ended. Dealers sold remaining inventory at discounts. Enthusiasts mourned. And the automotive world moved on to catalytic converters and fuel economy mandates. For a decade, Hemis gathered dust in garages. Owners who'd bought them new couldn't afford the gas or insurance. Kids who'd grown up worshiping them couldn't afford the purchase price, even used. The engine became a relic of an era when horsepower mattered more than efficiency. But around 1980, something shifted. Classic car values started climbing. Auctions began featuring muscle cars. And the Hemi, once dismissed as an impractical dinosaur, became the holy grail of collectors. Why? Because time had proven its significance. The Hemi wasn't just powerful, it was historically important. It represented the peak of American V8 development before regulations neutered everything. It was the last hurrah of pure, uncompromised performance. Restoration culture exploded in the 1990s. Original Hemi cars commanded premiums. A 1970 Plymouth Hemi Cuda that sold new for $4,000 traded hands for $150,000 by the year 2000. By 2020, Concours quality examples topped $1 million at auction. Numbers matching became obsessive. Original carburetors, date-coded bolts, factory paint codes. Authenticity mattered more than performance. Owners spent tens of thousands restoring engines to factory specifications, then never drove them. The Hemi had transcended its purpose. It was art now, not transportation. Modern Chrysler recognized the brand equity. In 2003, they revived the Hemi name for a new generation of truck and performance engines. The design was completely different. Modern overhead valve geometry, variable valve timing, fuel injection, but the name carried weight. Dodge sold hundreds of thousands of trucks and Challengers on Hemi nostalgia alone. But the new engines couldn't replicate the original's mystique. They were competent, powerful, efficient. They weren't legendary. Because legend requires context. The 426 Hemi existed in a moment. When engineers could build whatever physics allowed, consequences be damned. Modern engines exist in a world of regulations, fuel economy standards, and liability lawyers. The racing legacy endured differently. Drag racers still build Hemi-based engines bored and stroked to 600-plus cubic inches, making 3,000 horsepower on nitromethane. Top fuel cars trace their lineage directly to Tom Hoover's original design. The hemispherical chamber geometry remains ideal for maximum airflow and power density. In NASCAR, the Hemi's ghost still haunts. Current rules homogenize engines into near-identical performance. The idea that one manufacturer could show up with a technical advantage so overwhelming, it forces a rule change seems impossible now. But in 1964, it happened, and racing has been politically managed ever since. Enthusiasts debate the Hemi's place in history endlessly. Was it the greatest American V8, most powerful, most influential? The arguments miss the point. The Hemi mattered because it represented unfiltered ambition. Chrysler didn't ask permission, they didn't play politics. They built the best engine they could, consequences later. That philosophy died with emissions regulations and corporate risk management. Modern performance is calculated, optimized, focus grouped. The Hemi was raw, excessive, uncompromising. It embodied an era when more was always better and enough was never enough. Today, hearing a Hemi at full throttle is rare. Most survivors live in climate-controlled garages, trailered to car shows, idled for 5 minutes and put back to sleep. But occasionally, someone fires one up properly, holds it at 6,000 RPM, lets it scream. And for those 30 seconds, you understand why it mattered. The sound isn't just horsepower, it's defiance cast in cast iron and aluminum. It's the mechanical middle finger that Chrysler aimed at Ford, at NASCAR, at anyone who said it couldn't be done. What began as an engineering experiment became a legend long after the factory stopped building them. Picture that Plymouth Belvedere again? Daytona, 1964, pre-race morning. The Hemi fires up and for a moment, the entire paddock goes silent because everyone knows what's about to happen. Everyone knows the rulebook is about to become irrelevant. The 426 Hemi didn't just win races, it redefined what winning meant. It proved that engineering brilliance could embarrass corporate budgets. It forced the establishment to choose between fair competition and political convenience. And when they chose politics, the Hemi became more than an engine. It became a symbol. We remember it now not because it was the most powerful, though it was. Not because it was the most reliable, though it was that too. We remember it because it represented a moment when American engineering answered a simple question. What's possible if we ignore what's practical? The answer was 400, 25 horsepower, hemispherical combustion chambers, and a NASCAR ban within 8 months. Modern performance engines are incredible. More power, better efficiency, cleaner emissions. But they'll never carry the Hemi's mythology. Because mythology requires sacrifice. The Hemi sacrificed practicality, affordability, and corporate approval. In return, it achieved immortality. If you've ever driven a Hemi, heard one at full throttle, or even just seen one under a hood at a car show, you know, there's something about that valve configuration, that intake roar, that mechanical violence that reaches something primal. It's not logical, it's emotional, and maybe that's the real legacy. In an era of algorithms and optimization, we remember the machines that made us feel something. The Hemi made people feel power. It made Ford feel fear. It made NASCAR rewrite the rulebook. Not bad for an engine Chrysler built in 18 months because they were tired of losing. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.